Welcome everybody to an unusual Wednesday seminar for METRANS. Friday seminar for METRANS. They're usually on Wednesdays, but this is a special treat that we have because there's been a relatively new report out that was funded by LA Metro on women's travel, and we thought it would be great to have the people who were involved in the research come and talk to us. I'm going to introduce the panel, and then they're kind of on their own. They have this nicely choreographed presentation. Everybody's going to take a turn, and then we'll open it up for questions. I'm going to start at your left. Evie Blumenberg, raise your hand. Okay, so we have some UCLA here too. Anyway, those of you, most of us know Evie.
Thank you very much.
Professor Blumenberg, because she's come and actually spoken to us several times before. She was part of our very first PhD seminar series on emerging scholars. So she's been a great friend for us to do a lot of stuff for us. She's in the School of Public Affairs at UCLA, and she's the director of the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies. And even though it says here that her research examines the effects of urban structure and all that nice stuff, you may remember her most recently for her research on millennials, travel and millennials. Let's see, next we have, I'm losing my grip here, Judith McCourt. Okay. 20 years of transportation research experience and president of the Red Hill Group, where she oversees research on consumer insights and tracks emerging trends in the adoption of new technology, was involved in conducting this study, correct? Okay, next we have Claudia Galicia, if I said that right. Claudia is at LA Metro. She's a principal transportation planner at LA Metro, and she's been there for 12 years, and she has worked at the Central Library and other things. And here she is responsible and involved with administering the Women and Girls Governing Council and its various programs. She has a BA from University of California, Los Angeles, and we'll forgive her, and is a graduate of LA Metro's Leadership Academy. Last but not least, we have Emily Finkel, who some of you maybe recognize because she's a recent graduate. She's a senior transportation planner with Fair & Peers and manages the new Long Beach office. Oh, I didn't know that. And she is the company-wide lead on systemic safety, focusing on working with communities to create equitable transportations and make streets safer. And I assume Fair & Peers was also involved in the research.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for having us. And as mentioned, I work for LA Metro, and a couple years ago we started the Women and Girls Governing Council. So that's 60 Metro employees, women and men, but mostly women. And this initiative is a result of that council. So I'll talk a little about that. So these slides, and my colleagues here, we will discuss the project background, literature review, summary of methods and findings, and next steps. So often the work we do at Metro is guided by specific plans like Measure R, Measure M. The board might, direct us to do something, or executives provide guidance on what staff does. This project is different, and like I mentioned, the project was proposed to the CEO for approval by the Women and Girls Governing Council. And the goals of the Women and Girls Governing Council are to have a gender-balanced workforce to accelerate change, because progress for women is progress for everyone, and not just to seek one solution, but a comprehensive strategy to address the complex and interrelated causes of gender inequity, mobility, and economic challenges. The second point here, I think, is worth highlighting and elaborating on, because often people have asked us why even conduct this study? Why study women in particular? Why not men? And I would like to point out that progress for women affects everyone. So improving the system for women, which are often times, more vulnerable, improves the system for everyone. So the council, Women and Girls Governing Council, we break up the larger group into different focus groups that examine our policies and practices with different areas. So Metro as an employer, Metro as a service provider, and Metro as a catalyst for economic development. And this recommendation came out of the service provider group. So the first cohort in 2017 conducted research on data sets within, actually I'll go back. So these are some statistics in relation to Metro. So we provide 1.3 million daily trips. 54% of our bus riders are female. 52% of our rail riders are female. So it's a slight majority, but it is a majority. The majority of our riders are women. So women depend more on public transit than men. And this is why it was important for us to study. The service provider group conducted research on data sets within Metro and found that Metro has a lot of information, but we weren't really dissecting that information by gender, so therefore we weren't analyzing the differences and how things affect women differently. We did not use the information, and that leads to gender neutral planning that might not be the most effective type of planning. So we decided to utilize gender specific data to ensure equitable outcomes in planning and operations of service. We used existing data that Metro collects on a regular basis, such as onboard, and we collected new data, and that'll be discussed further. This is the first time a transportation agency in the United States has studied this issue. We cannot have an equitable system without taking into consideration the different travel patterns and needs of women. Women have more complex mobility patterns, and Metro was interested in identifying mobility barriers and challenges, such as safety and affordability. The goals of the study were to improve safety, reliability, and convenience for women riders, and ensure that women's concerns are incorporated into planning, design, and operations of the LA Metro system. So you all might be aware we're going through a massive expansion of the system currently, and we want to take into account the needs of women. And I think I'll pass it over to Evelyn at this point.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I want to thank all of you for having us, and it's pretty exciting to see a packed room to kind of think about Metro's campaign and to think about sort of the intersection between gender and travel. So the UCLA team was responsible for doing some of the background sort of literature, sort of looking at the national literature and national data as context for developing the project. So I had two UCLA partners in crime for this work, Madeline Brosen, who works with me at the Lewis Center, and Anastasia Lukaitu-Sideris, who's been doing a lot of work on transit and safety and sexual harassment, in addition to our work on this project. So I'm only going to make a few remarks. I'm going to be very quick so we can sort of see the main show, which is the focus of the analysis that was done for Metro. And so I'm going to do two things. I'm going to show you some slides that were not in the report, but I'm going to say, why do I think it's important that we are thinking about gender and travel and planning accordingly. And then I'm just going to say very briefly, I'm not going to do this literature justice this afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about women's travel behavior, sort of summarizing just a few insights from the literature, but also the national data that comes from the most recent National Household Travel Survey. And I'm going to do this all in just a few minutes. So why do I think it's important that we study gender and travel, and it's because women have experienced persistent transportation barriers that are essential that we address. So they're not new, and it's really wonderful that transit agencies like Metro are taking these up. So two things, so this is from an old study, I guess it goes back to 1965, and it looks at the gender division of unpaid work, right? So you can see that gap, you can see changes in that gap over time, and I have, it will come up over and over again that those differences in responsibilities both for work and unpaid labor in the home have huge implications for the travel behavior of women. So those are old data from a study that I cut and pasted into this slide. And here are new data from the American Time Use Survey in 2018. So you can see that those disparities are declining somewhat, but they still exist. Women bear the disproportionate responsibility for unpaid labor in the home at the same time where we've seen huge increases in women's labor force participation as well. Okay, second example, relates to transit, sexual violence, and harassment. I actually cribbed these things for another talk that I gave. So how many of you know that there was something called mashers at the turn of the century? And they were basically harassers in public space. And so those are clips sort of based on, the turn of the century. And you can see a lot of the shots focuses on transportation as well. So harassment in transit, and then certainly we'll come back to this, but as part of the Me Too movement also, so those same kinds of harassment and safety issues we face today. Okay, so again, I'm going to be sort of really sort of brief here about some basic facts about women and travel. So first, we see, you kind of saw, a little bit of it in thinking about the household division of labor, but there have been some narrowing in the differences in the travel patterns between men and women over time. And Lois Takahashi on your faculty has done some work in this area with Randall Crane. But still, just like the division of household labor, there still are significant differences. And I'm not going to focus on this too much because I'm only talking for a few minutes, but certainly there's a tremendous amount of variation across different groups of women as well. Okay, so let me just start with just what some similarities are, because it's important to sort of think about those as well. So one thing, which my students always start getting queasy when I talk about this, is that most men and women travel around in cars, okay? So that's certainly one similarity. The second thing is that it does seem like commute distances and durations have increased both for men and women sort of over time. But as I mentioned in the setup, there are key differences that remain, okay? So the first, and you can see the data, The graphs on the right come from data from the National Household Travel Survey. Women continue to make shorter sort of trips, both in length and duration than men, so that's a persistent difference. Women are more likely to trip chain, so string a number of trips together on a single tour, right? Which means that they have very complex sort of travel patterns, sort of typically. Women use cars slightly more than men. So if you go back to the literature, that's something that has changed over time, although the differences aren't huge. But just like we mentioned, they're slightly more likely to use transit than men as well. And then women are more likely than men to have real and perceived safety and security concerns. So I already said sexual harassment, physical and psychological constraints, and that these both perceptions and reality in terms of sort of safety have implications for when women travel, right, during the day, at night, right, with whom they travel. Are they willing to have the freedom to go out alone? So, and how they travel, their choice of mode as well. And then my last slide for this afternoon is, Madeline Brosen. I'm going to give her credit. She made this schematic. So just looking at some of we kind of talk through this in our literature review, the principal factors affecting sort of women's travel behavior. So certainly economic. So there continues to be gender gaps as they relate to the labor market. Cultural, I talked about the gender division of household labor. The physical environment, so particular safety hazards, dark parking garages, right? Isolated bus stops, those sorts of things. And then finally, that piece also is related to psychological barriers, right? The fear of safety, traveling at night, traveling in isolated areas. So that's it for me this morning, and I'm gonna turn things over to my colleagues.
As was mentioned, my name is Emily Finkel. I'm a senior planner with Fair and Peers, and we were the lead consultant for this project for Metro, working with a team of amazing folks that you see here, and also one of our team members, Monique Lopez, couldn't be here today, but also wanted to recognize her as well. So I'm gonna go over the summary of all the different methods that we used on this project. It was a really robust mixed methods approach to data collection for this effort. Over the several months we worked on this, we engaged more than 1,900 women, and we wanted to do that recognizing that there is a breadth and variety of experience among this demographic group, and subgroups are having different experiences that we really wanted to learn more about. So the approach was really to take a deep look at the existing data sources, building off of the work that Dr. Blumenberg and her colleagues did at UCLA for the literature review. We also wanted to cast a wide net in terms of our online survey. We wanted to have robust, candid discussions with writers during our focus group efforts. And we wanted to better understand behavior through observation and discussions within the transit context. So we went out to stops and stations and on buses and trains through our participant observations, as well as our pop-ups. And we also wanted to really take time. We thought this was incredibly important to listen to women who make up the core of Metro's ridership. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we engaged those folks. So for the existing data piece, we looked at all of the Metro data that was provided to us, and it actually turned out that quite a bit of the data had gender information associated with it, and had just not been disaggregated by gender yet. And so that was a really important undertaking, was to look at all of the onboard surveys and other pieces of data that Metro collects, including things like customer service comments, and we took a look at crime data, which didn't necessarily have gender associated with it, but in terms of sexual assault crimes, there is a gendered impact to those, so we took a look at those as well. And then we also looked at national household travel survey data, some of which was covered already, but we took a look at the LA region data specifically. So you can see we looked at trip characteristics, personal characteristics, and household characteristics in our analysis there. So then we have a group of what we called our innovative methods. And the idea here was to have a qualitative approach to this research. We wanted to engage specific populations, gather nuanced perspectives, uncover revealed preferences, involve regular writers, and amplify the perspectives of harder to reach writers. And really validate what we were hearing in, stated preference surveys and things like that, and identify any new patterns that maybe we weren't seeing through our other methods. And here's where I really want to recognize Monique and her team at Pueblo, because they led a lot of the work that falls within this category. So the first is participant observation. So at Fair and Peers, we have an anthropologist on staff, and we also, her name's Dr. Cheryl Crozier, and we also worked with Dr. Adonia Lugo. And they really brought this participant observation method to light for us. And this is part of an ethnographic data collection approach. So we really were looking at qualitative research where we could capture what the experiences of individuals were in the transit space. And if you've looked through the report at all, there's a really fascinating summary of ethnographic research methods related to transit that's part of the appendix for this report that's written by Dr. Lugo. And so we used the participant observation to uncover what the behavior patterns were that surveys may miss, to collect details that illustrate the diversity of women's transit experiences, and to humanize the findings. An important part of participant observation is that the participants are involved. So each Fair and Peer staff or other people that we worked with who went out and rode buses and trains for over 100 hours, they were really bringing back what their perspective was through their own lived experience. And that's an important piece that we captured as part of this tool. So you can see the observation tool here that we used, which had a vehicle diagram where we noted seating preferences, checkboxes for amenities and different features of stops and stations, and then room to write recorded notes. And we recorded a lot of different themes, but things from seating choices, interactions among riders, alighting, bus stop amenities, traveling with children, phone use, standing on vehicles, waiting at stops and stations. And like I said, we did this for over 100 hours. We collected 2,200 unique observations and coded all of those. That took place on 19 bus and rail lines throughout the county. And we covered all time periods of the day, including overnight service. So the next is the participatory workshops. And so this is really a community embedded form of engagement, and we saw it. And it was in a way that we could address some of the persistent biases that we might see in our other methods of research. And it is also a way to engage folks who may be harder to reach or less likely to participate in those other methods because they're linguistically isolated or illiterate or digitally disenfranchised. So we thought this was a really important piece of the work. And the project team facilitated 3 of these workshops. So you can see they had lots of different, this is a collage making workshop. So there's lots of different art options here. We had emojis and photos of pictures and stations and different like 3D materials. And so the people who participated in these workshops made a collage out of these materials. And you can see folks doing that here. And then they were able to talk about their transit experience through that collage. And then they gave a presentation to others in the room. And so it was a really engaging way. I feel like we uncovered a lot of discussion that we wouldn't have otherwise. And this involved 70 women, 10 children, and we were at the Southern California Resource Services for Independent Living Center, working with women with disabilities. We went to the Downtown Women's Center to speak with women who are currently or had formerly experienced homelessness. And then we worked with a parents group in Southeast LA that is of varying immigration statuses that organize around immigrant rights. So it was a very unique way to come in and have a discussion about transit with those folks. And the people, the over 80 people that we engaged through this effort ride collectively over 65 of Metro's lines and all bus lines and all of the train lines. So that was a really great way to get a lot of different perspectives about different types of service. So the last one I'll mention here is the pop-up engagements. And so this is another piece we were able to do to talk to people within the transit context. So we did pop-up events that lasted for a couple hours at the Willowbrook Blue Line station, the El Monte Silver Line station, and then the North Hollywood Red Line station. And we set up this banner that you can see on the left, asking people what makes your ride on Metro difficult and what would make it easy. And then we got to have really great conversations with all sorts of people. You can see Claudia there on the left. And this was just another fantastic way to get a lot of information from riders and to also be out there experiencing what riders are experiencing every day. So now I'm going to turn it over to Judith, who will talk about our survey and focus group methods.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. And in so many ways, this project was unique. There are projects that one works on during one's career where you have lots of work that's gone before it. And in many ways, there was a lot of data that was out there, but this was a really unique opportunity to bring together data here in the metro area and really to look at something for the very first time. And having been around the block a bit, it's not often that I get a little nervous, but it was a little nervous because there was a lot on the line for this. It was, first of all, it was about women, which was personally interesting to me. But secondly, it was also about doing something for our community and really not having a roadmap. And so what this study did was unique in so many ways because we used, as you've heard, literature reviews. We used a combination of really innovative methods. But, you know, when it gets to it too, people also want it, the data geeks, and I am one of them, you really also want numbers behind it. So we were challenged in a lot of ways. We're also challenged because this study was about women, but we also wanted to know somewhat have a baseline study so that we also had information about men in this particular group. So while we were studying, we were interested in what women were doing, and we did oversample that group, but we were also interested in having a sample of men so we could understand and compare and contrast the results, which Claudia will do. So I'm not really going to spend a lot of time. We used two we're going to call them conventional, went back and forth traditional. It's pretty hard to be that person after there's the innovative side, which Monique clearly was, but nevertheless, I'm the conventional and traditional. And so we did two portions of research. We did qualitative and quantitative. This here refers to the quantitative, which was an online survey. We used the qualitative research. Everything was an unfolding. It was a little bit like an onion, because as we went, we would peel back one layer and it would inform where we went next. So we actually did the focus groups before we did the online surveys, because that informed the language in some ways. How do women speak? What do women say? What are the issues we think, and what are the gaps that we have? So we wanted to be able to attack this and look at it from the perspectives that were mentioned. What were the economic? What were the physical? What were the cultural? What were the psychological issues? And we also wanted to be able to use data to inform. So no easy task. So what we did was we did a total, you can see it's a very robust sample. It's 2,600 people that we talked to. We oversampled women relative to men. It was about a 2-to-1 ratio there but we also had then a really good sample of men against which we could compare. Why did we do such a large sample? We wanted to do that because we wanted to be able to dive. And in order to data dive, you really have to have significant enough sample sizes so that you are really making informed use, you're using the data in an informed way. So we also had other issues as well that we needed to figure out. It's a large metropolitan area. We wanted to talk to people who currently rode Metro, those people who had previously ridden Metro, and people who were non-riders. So there were a lot of sample parameters to balance as we went through this. And I'm going to give a shout out to Fei Chiang Law, who's not here, and Daisy Casada, who's also on my staff, who really did a phenomenal job in balancing all of this information and getting it done. And also, I just want to talk a little bit about getting it done. The group of women here and the group who worked on this team got this thing done, the whole study, in what, maybe 6-7 months? Maybe 8. Okay, so this is something where we really cooked. We really, every day, Christmas, it didn't matter, Hanukkah, we did it. So in terms of the online study, I talked a little bit about a representative sample. We also wanted to really take a look at the development of the questionnaire. That, again, in itself was an enormous task, because we wanted to make sure we were asking the right questions, not leading questions in the way that people needed to respond that was meaningful. We also wanted to make sure that we were able to reach people who spoke different languages. This was available in simplified Chinese, it was available in English, it was available in Spanish. So we also reached out to the community in other ways as well. So, because we know there are biases with online surveys, certain people have access to it and certain people don't. So we're aware of that, but then when you take it in line of all your other data, you can actually triangulate and see what's going on. So moving forward, you can see the large geographic sample. There were over 400 zip codes that we covered during this survey. So trying to get this was a pretty big deal. We had defined the survey area in a way that we wanted to cover Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, all the counties where we had come up with a geographic area that we felt was influenced by Metro, so that as Metro is going forward, they can actually work with recommendations that work not only in perhaps the inner city, but in suburban areas, and things can be different. So moving forward, the second part, or really the first part, was focus groups. And we did 3 focus groups. We used them to inform, as I said, the development of the survey. We did one in English, we did one in Spanish. Those 2 were both with women, and we also did one with men. And I think what you're going to see as you start to see the results here is differences in perceptions and differences in what people think. But I'm just going to give you a little flavor here of what kind of things that we saw in the focus group. What did women, these are pretty much from women, what did they say to us? Time comes up. We talked about that issue. We talked about how many trips you have to make. So this added a really human context to what we were looking for. It also corroborated data that we were seeing from other sources. So one thing I would leave you with as people who are going out into a research career is that I always think there's Jacari's window. You may have probably heard of that. At some point, which you have a room and you have windows, and you need to try to open every window. And that's exactly what we did, because if you're looking this way, I have a view of the clock. I don't have a view of what's behind me. So as a researcher, it's our responsibility to try to get a 360 view of what you're looking at so that you can actually make informed decisions. No easy thing. Good luck. I know you'll do a good job. And Claudia, now she has the fun part, the exciting part.
So all of this that has been spoken about leads to the report, and I'll go briefly over some of the findings. And the findings were categorized into several different subject matters, and you see the list here. So I'll highlight a few things on these slides. The thing about overall travel behavior, and so this is, whether regardless of what mode you're using, transit or your personal vehicle, is that women are more likely to be hypermobile or immobile, and more likely than men. So hypermobile meaning 7 or more trips per day, immobile meaning you don't take any trips in a particular day. And that could mean, that women are more burdened from this travel behavior, the hypermobile, in terms of financial cost, the stress, the safety, exposure to safety issues, and the time that it takes to make these trips. And the immobile women are more likely to be disconnected from opportunities. So maybe you don't work because you don't have access to a car, or because it just is too difficult to get to a particular job. So that's that. There's also some graph here about commute trip lengths. Take shorter trips, slightly, 38% compared to 30% take less than 5 miles, and some differences there. Also, as has been mentioned before, is women do more of the household duties, and so that also relays into taking trips. So I might have to take a trip to drop off my child and to buy groceries, versus a man might just go to work and come home. So that's a burden. So the time of day also varies between men and women. They have a midday peak, and that doesn't really get addressed in the service that is provided by transit. And we're looking into changing that. There's currently next gen bus study that will revamp the whole system of bus service. Women are more likely to live in a car-free or car-light household, and women are less likely than men to have a driver's license. So for overall transit behavior, you see here that women are slightly more likely to use the system 3 or more days per week. And women use the system for different reasons. So in the focus group, we heard things like they use transit because they don't have an option, and men use it because it's convenient and efficient. Here are some differences. So this is, and I'll echo what Judith said, that this is new information, and it's just the starting point. So we will continue to dig deeper into some of these topics, and we'll continue to study the issue. But 38% of men think that riding the bus with children is easy. I mean, it kind of makes me question whether they actually have ridden the bus with children. And riding the bus with packages or strollers, those differences there, show that, look, if you've ever done it, you know it's not easy. There's another, I'll come back to these because there's an interesting picture here. Oh, did we take it out? Oh no, see, look at this, you know. You have to fold your stroller, you have to carry your kid, carry the stroller, you know, you have to somehow figure out how to tap, pay your fare, and so it's not easy. But let me see, okay. I know we're running out of time and I want to get to some of your questions. Safety is another big difference between men and women, and women are more vulnerable. There is a place somewhere here, let's see. Okay, maybe it's not here, but the survey did show that 60% of female riders feel safe riding during the day, and that number drops to 20% at night. So that, you know, again, the implications of that, maybe you're not going somewhere at night because you don't feel safe. And yeah. So financial burdens, I think is here somewhere, disproportionately, so, oh yeah, so we put it in the access. 80% of the women who responded to our onboard survey and earn less than $35,000 a year. The median earnings for female respondents is, you know, a little over $16,000. So the financial burdens of transit disproportionately affect women and affect low-income women even further. 59% of our bus riders are below the poverty line. And yes, there's programs like our low income pass, but even that can be difficult for someone who's low income because you have to come up somehow with, you know, I think it's $76 at the beginning of the month in order to pay for the monthly pass. So sometimes people don't have that $76 and they end up paying, you know, cash for each trip they take, and it just adds up and they end up paying more than what a monthly pass would be. So those are things that we're going to consider. And you know, again, if you're traveling with someone in your care, whether it be a child or an elderly parent, then you have to pay for their fare as well. So here's a graph about how much women spend on themselves and on others. And you know, there's the added burden of there might be a time of day where you don't feel safe taking transit, so then you have to pay a premium to do, you know, an Uber or a Lyft. We heard a lot about that in the focus groups, and you know, it's I'm sure you all have heard of the pink tax. I mean, women make less, and then you pay more for a lot of things. So I'm breezing through these, but you know, here you see some other data that was analyzed, like the stroller complaints, the elevator complaints. Some of our elevators have been put in places that are not very safe. You know, it's like over in a dark corner, and you know, it's just, I wouldn't take it. And here are some other interesting points about why women complain. It's reliability mostly. They got passed up, they're late, no show, and there's some of the reasons why they find it difficult, too slow, not frequent enough. But you know, a lot of times they're just dependent on it. So we need to make improvements there. I'll skip that one. Here's some more statistics about carrying space. Space for carrying items, there really isn't. I mean, oftentimes the buses and train cars are crowded enough, and you know, if you're traveling with kids, you have stuff and there's no room. So we're gonna consider maybe redesigning some of the new vehicles that we will be procuring in the future. I'll skip this one. And next steps. So now that we have data to support, you know, what we felt was the case, we will be pursuing development of a gender action plan, and these are the areas of actions that we will look at. primarily. And I think I will open it up to questions at this point.
Thank you very much.